What's up, guys? Toad. Still a bit under the weather, but back again. I just showered. Hopefully, I'm feeling a little bit better here. I don't know. I'm maybe feeling a little refreshed after that. Got to get this done. NFL Week 17, second to last week, the penultimate week. This is a tough week, man, because it comes down to a lot of motivational aspects. You got to figure out which teams are motivated, which teams might not be. And there are certain spots where I kind of like the spot for a certain team, but I can't really play the game because the market is actually like signaling strongly against it, and it's just crazy. And like in my pick 'em pools, I hate that because I don't know what I'm gonna do. Even betting, I kind of hate that because it's like I think I have like a strong play here, but the market is disagreeing with me so significantly that I'm like I have to just lay off it. So I'm gonna give you three plays here though, and I think the market is in agreement with all three. All three are good situations. I like them all. I think these are the three best plays of the week. Let's do it. Last week I was 2-0-1, mostly because I got the best numbers. I mean, the Chargers was an easy win. Nice wire-to-wire cover with the Bills in a bad spot and a letdown spot of a crushing the Cowboys, having to go out to the West Coast and face a Chargers team who just fired Brandon Staley and was fired up from that. So that was good. Nice, easy wire-to-wire one there. Then Tennessee, who probably should have hit on the money line. They were winning that game basically right at the end against the Seahawks. They put up a good effort in that game, held the Seahawks very much in check. Geno Smith still kind of getting his bearings again, I think, having come back from injury, but he threw the winning touchdown right at the end, and luckily I was on 3.5 with the Titans, so they covered that by a half point. Hopefully, the bettors that were in there on Tennessee with me got the best number on that, or at least got the push on that. And then speaking of a push, Dallas pushed the +2 that I had on them. I thought they were in a good spot. I think they probably should have won the game outright. I mean, you had some weird stuff going on in that game where Dallas put together a really good opening drive. It seems like McCarthy is really good at like scripting those opening drives, especially against a defense that's not that good like Miami. I really don't think they are. Dallas got down to the basically like the 1-inch line, and they had their running back, whoever it was, that was trying to get in there, kind of spun around and like just missed getting in, and then they wound up fumbling on the next play, basically at like the 1-foot line. Totally ridiculous. And then Miami wound up putting together like a really long drive the other way, starting inside their own 1, and they wound up getting a field goal. So that also clobbered any like over possibilities that people might have had in that game, where I kind of thought it would be a bit of a high-scoring game with both teams not having great defenses really and having pretty good offenses and be good at scripting some of that offense, especially on first drives like that. And that one play where Dallas was that close to getting into the end zone right at the beginning kind of hurt Dallas's chances to cover that number, and it hurt the over a lot because of all that. So that sucked, although Dallas was able to. They actually probably still should have won the game. They were winning right near the end, and they gave up a final game-winning field goal drive right at the end there, and they had a couple of chances to stop Miami, and they couldn't do it. And I wound up losing by 2, so it pushed for me. We move on to this week, Week 17, this slate of games. Oh, boy. What do we have going on here? In my daily breakdown, I already talked about tonight's game. We do have a Thursday game, a Saturday game, and a Sunday night game. There is no Monday night game this week. I think the Monday night games are finally over after the trio of Christmas Monday games. So Thursday, I talked about this game on my daily breakdown. Jets-Browns tonight. This is just an awful matchup, and the line actually continues to go down on the total. It's down to 34, even though it's 63% of the tickets on the over, 65% of the cash on the over. So it still looks like there's a little bit of a cash discrepancy on the over, but the line looks like it's still moving down towards the under. I kind of have to think this is going to be a lower scoring game, just in line with what we've seen on the majority of the Thursday night games. And given that these two teams have really good defenses, although everybody knows that, but these two teams have been putting up a bunch of high point totals recently, and all of this is reiterating what I said in my daily breakdown video today as well. But the Browns have been scoring a ton. Joe Flacco had a ridiculous performance last week with all those throws to Amari Cooper, just totally ridiculous. So that was against the Houston Texans defense, and it was a Texans offense that didn't have Stroud, so they couldn't really put together prolonged drives. The defense is not very good. The Jets defense is a totally different animal, so I don't expect Flacco to totally be lighting it up like that in this game. And the Jets, they went to Trevor Siemian because Wilson, I guess, is now hurt, and they're not going to bring Aaron Rodgers back. And Siemian actually did okay against Washington, but Washington was making a ton of mistakes, as they do, and setting the Jets up with a lot of like quick scoring chances early in the game as well. And then the Jets somehow with that defense against Washington somehow almost blew the entire game because Washington actually pulled Sam Howell, the mistake maker, Sam Howell, and put in Jacoby Brissett, who's really the opposite, although he's more of a game manager. He's really good at protecting the football, but he's not really good at mounting huge comebacks like that. But that's exactly what Washington did, despite being up against a good defense of the Jets. I think the Jets kind of led up, and all of a sudden the Jets' 20-point lead had turned into a 1-point deficit right near the end, and the Jets had to win on a field goal right at the end. Just really ridiculous, kind of an inexcusable collapse with the Jets there, but that's why those two results last week for the Jets and the Browns being really high scoring, I think is going to kind of lend itself more towards maybe a lower scoring game here. It's a Thursday night game, so it's also a quick turnaround time and not a familiar situation really for the Jets, having to go to Cleveland. They don't go there that often, so kind of a negative for the Jets for that one reason, but also I think that kind of lends itself to a bit of a lower scoring game, I would say. Although the total is so low, it's like, I don't know, is the total really skewed higher because of what we just saw last week? It looks like maybe it kind of isn't because the total's still so low. I don't know, but the Jets will be rolling with Trevor Siemian again here, and these teams still do have good defenses, and because of what we saw last week, the Jets really struggled against Washington and almost lost the game against Washington. That's a really bad game for the Jets. So I think that might help refocus the Jets a little bit, having almost lost to Washington like that. Even though it's a quick turnaround time, they have to go on the road. 7.5 is a lot to lay with the Browns. The Browns are up from 5.5 to 7.5. Looks like 7.5 with reduced juice maybe, and they have 80% of the cash and 78% of tickets. So it looks like the line's moved up on the Browns and they have the cash discrepancy, but I'm not sure I buy it because the Browns looked so good last week, lighting up Houston. But again, like I said, Houston's defense is nowhere close to what the Jets' defense is, and CJ Stroud did not play in that game. So, and I thought it was a good spot for the Browns. It was the second game for Houston without CJ Stroud, and they're coming off that big rally game without him when they beat Tennessee, where I was on Houston in that one. I liked the Browns quite a bit in that game against Houston. The Browns are coming off almost losing to the Chicago Bears in the previous game, so that refocused the Browns a bit. Now, even though the Browns do have the advantage on the quick turnaround time being at home here, I do think this is a lot of points, especially in a game where it's two good defenses going up against each other. And because of what we saw last week, I think the line's a little bit high on the Browns here, so I'm not going to play it, but I think I would only be able to lean to the Jets plus all those points there because of what we saw last week with the Jets not playing well. Really, for 2 weeks in a row, the Jets not playing well at all. Nobody's really going to want anything to do with the Jets. And we can see here the public is on the Browns, and the Browns really lit up the scoreboard last week. So that's the way I look at that. I lean to the Jets plus the points there very slightly, but certainly not going to be a play. Neither is the Saturday night game. This is a good matchup. The Lions-Cowboys. Cowboys look like they've ticked down now from 6 to 5.5, but they have 75% of the cash on them and 67% of the tickets on them. So the Cowboys do have the cash discrepancy, and they are much better at home than they are on the road, and they've played 2 straight road games. I lean a little bit to the Dallas Cowboys here, but I don't know, because the Cowboys, I think, have a little bit of a shorter week because they play later than the Lions did, I believe. I think the Lions, they both played on Sunday, I guess, though, but the Lions played in the earlier slate. The Lions, they clinched the division, man. So even though it was a close call against the Vikings, and the Lions actually did play better than the final score indicated. They actually had a better statistical performance than the final score indicated, even though they were also helped out by a lot of Nick Mullins turnovers by the Vikings in that game. The Vikings had chances to win that game, even right up until the end. So I could see that going both ways for the Lions. Really, maybe the Lions almost losing to Minnesota might refocus them a little bit, because the Lions going into that Minnesota game, that was a desperate Minnesota team. The Lions are coming off a really, really big blowout win over Denver on primetime the prior week, so the Lions weren't really in the best spot last week, although I think they did play pretty well, and they were celebrating a lot for having clinched the division. I think it's not really something the Lions have done very often. They don't win this division very often. I don't know when the last time they might have won the division is, if ever. I'm not even sure, but they were really celebrating that win, so that has me thinking maybe they're going to be a little bit high and mighty coming into this game, even though on the other hand, Minnesota played them close, so maybe that could shock them back into focus a little bit. I'm not totally sure which way it's going to go there with the Detroit Lions. I could see it going either way there, and the Cowboys did have a tough game against Miami. Probably should have won the game, though. And now, off of that, and that having happened off of the blowout loss, I don't know, man. Maybe it means the Cowboys are going to like refocus themselves and turn it back on, because the Lions do have more padding than the Cowboys do here. Even though the Lions are still playing for playoff seeding here, the Lions have already clinched their division, whereas the Cowboys are still in a fight with the Eagles to win their division. So maybe the Cowboys have a little bit of a motivational aspect to this game because of that, because they're still in the heated battle for their division, whereas the Lions already have clinched their division. So I don't know if that means they're going to take their foot off the gas a little bit. Probably not, though, when you're playing the Dallas Cowboys and you know how good Dallas is. So actually, my instinct was to kind of lean to the Cowboys here because we saw the Lions celebrating so much last week, but now I'm not really totally sure because the Cowboys are off a big game and the Detroit Lions are off a game where they didn't really play that well, but sticking in the back of my head is them over-celebrating, clinching the division. So, of course, I'm not going to have a play on this, but I don't know. I initially leaned the Cowboys, but now I'm not totally sure about that. So I don't actually know. We can stay off of that, and let's go to the actual plays here. We'll do the actual plays, and then I'll talk about some of the leans where the market is totally disagreeing with me before I get out of here. This might be a short video, actually. Hey, all right. First game up on Sunday, I'm going to have a play. We're already 11 minutes, though, so maybe not. I am on the Miami Dolphins plus 3.5. I think you can still get 3.5s out there. I think it was at 4 at one point, but I could not find any 4s. It's sitting at 3 with juice or 3.5. I like taking the 3.5 with the Miami Dolphins here. The Ravens look like they're ticking down a bit from the 3.5 to the 3 with juice, like I said. So hopefully you can get in on it, still finding the 3.5. Or, I mean, you can take a plus 3 with reduced juice, I guess. But I would try to get the hook, obviously, which I was able to do late yesterday. Ravens have 62% of the tickets, but 56% of the cash on Miami. So I like the cash discrepancy there with the cash discrepancy on the Dolphins, even though the public is definitely going to be on the Ravens here. And I like that there's reverse line movement here, which is against where the public ticket percentage is. The line's actually moving towards the Dolphins. And I think the thought is that people are going to look at this game and think, like, this is too easy to take the Ravens. Like, they just have to win by a field goal after what we just saw last week, man. The Ravens on Monday night, on Christmas, primetime, went into San Francisco and really demolished them. They won by 14 points, so they're actually winning by 21 really late in that game. And, yeah, I think the Ravens did wind up outplaying San Francisco and legitimately getting that win, but I think the blowout aspect of it is a little bit overstated because the 49ers did have 5 turnovers in that game. So you'd have to remember that. I think it was 5 turnovers. They had a lot of turnovers in that game, so that made the win look better for the Ravens than it probably actually was, even though I think they played well enough to get that win anyway. So the hype is all going to be on the Ravens here, man. Everybody was handling that as a Super Bowl preview game, saying that the 49ers are going to win. I leaned to the Ravens in that one. I liked the Ravens in that one. They somehow were able to get it done, and now the hype is all going to be on the Ravens here. Everybody's saying they just beat the best team in football, the 49ers. Now the Ravens, people are kind of hailing them as the AFC champs, the Super Bowl contender Ravens already, maybe even like handing them like being the front runner to win the Super Bowl at this point. Let's take a step back a little bit here. Even though I do think the Ravens are the best team in the AFC, I think they are a very good team. This is a huge letdown spot, man, and they're on a short week coming off that Monday night game. They put all of that effort into that Monday night game, and they were out on the Pacific Coast for it, so they're switching time zones. They had to go out to the Pacific time zone, and now they have to come back east. This is a pretty tough spot for the Ravens on a short week like that, shifting time zones. They're in like a prime letdown spot here after everybody saw what they did last week. Huge win, and Baltimore does have that cushion in their division at least, even though this is now like, although I think Miami does as well because Miami won last week. So both of these teams are now battling for like the 1 seed in the AFC. So that's what the motivation is here for both teams. Both teams are fighting for that, but will the Ravens still be in a letdown spot after what we just saw from them? I think it's definitely possible, and the market is leaning that way. And like I said, I think after what we just saw, I think the public is really going to think this looks easy to take the Ravens, basically just to win by a field goal. I think it looks too easy, even though I do have the Ravens as maybe a couple points better than the Dolphins, so maybe they should be like a 4.5 point favorite or so. In this spot, I think it's very questionable. I lean to the Dolphins. I'm playing the Dolphins, of course. I like the Dolphins. Dolphins are coming off kind of a scare last week, even though it was a big game against the Dallas Cowboys. I think the Dolphins are absolutely going to be focused here. I think Baltimore, they had their legitimizer game last week, man. They have nothing left to really prove. Like, that was their, like, proving ground situation right there. They just proved we might be the best team in football. We can do this. Miami, I think, still has something to prove, even though people have been saying Miami can't beat anybody good. And yeah, they beat Dallas, but people are still kind of knocking that win. Even I am, because I'm saying that Dallas probably should have gotten into the end zone on the first drive there. Dallas came back and was winning that game. They came back from a 9-point deficit, scored 10 unanswered, and they were winning that game with almost no time left. I'm saying that maybe Miami got a little bit lucky there. I think people are saying that. I think that's still going to stick in Miami's head. I think Miami still might feel a little bit disrespected here, and they know they're the underdog here. I think that's going to motivate Miami a little bit more than Baltimore. Miami has a little bit of extra time here, having played the previous day. They have one extra day to do this. They're at least staying in the Eastern time zone here. I like Miami. I think it's a very big letdown spot for Baltimore. I think getting points with Miami to this degree, I like it. I'm on the Dolphins. The market seems to agree with me. I'm doing it. Like I say, you got to kind of just fade what you saw last. Even though Miami themselves are kind of off a big win, nothing is bigger than what Baltimore just did last week. So I think it's one of the biggest letdown situations of the week that Baltimore is in. I like Miami. I'm doing it. Miami plus 3.5. Next up, what do we got going on here? Next up, I like Indianapolis -3. And unfortunately, I think that it's kind of up to 3.5 in most places now. I found a 3, not last night, but earlier in the day yesterday, I think, or maybe the previous evening. I forget when I played it. I found the 3 on the Indianapolis Colts. This line is moving up, man. So I don't know what you want to do. This line is really shooting up, and the money line is like really quite high now as well. I think maybe laying the 3.5 is still okay with Indy here. I'm laying the 3 with Indy. If you can lay the 3 with juice, if it's not too much juice, maybe. If you can find like a 3 with like -120 juice, like I don't know, maybe that would be the way to play it instead of the 3.5. But either way, I like the Indianapolis Colts here. I think this is my favorite play of the week, really. Maybe not at 3.5, and it's shooting even through 3.5. So maybe getting the 3.5 is still going to put you on a better number than where this winds up, because I think this number came out too low. When I saw the opener, even though it might look, if you think it looks too low, maybe the public also thinks that. But in this case, I don't think they do. As you can see here, the Colts have gone up from the opener of 3 to 3.5 with juice. The public is on the Raiders right now. It's 65% of the tickets on them and only 54% of the cash. So the Raiders look like a square public underdog here with reverse line movement against them on the Colts and the cash discrepancy on the Colts side as well. Less of the cash than the tickets on the Raiders. So the Raiders are actually getting the public action. When I saw this line come out, I said this is recency bias. I said this line's too short. I said this line is basically saying the Colts are like a half point better than the Raiders at 3. Give me a break, man. The Colts are probably 1 to 2 points better than the Raiders. I think they're getting totally disrespected with that initial number that came out, and I think it's really based on what we saw last week. Because what did we see last week between these two teams? The Colts looked awful in their game last week. They got blown out by the Atlanta Falcons, and I had mentioned that I liked the Falcons in that game. The Colts, even though they had extra time off after having played, I believe, on the Saturday prior to that, maybe was it even the Thursday game? I don't even remember. Whatever they played the previous week, they played one of the earlier games, and the Colts blew out the Pittsburgh Steelers. But I think they kind of just had extra time kind of just to sit on that, like, blowout win, even though that was a game where they were actually down 13-0 out of the gate in that one against the Steelers, too. I thought the Colts were not in a good spot last week, going on the road, a road out-of-conference game that means a little bit less, even though, yeah, the Colts are really in a dogfight to make the playoffs here. They're fighting for both the division and potentially a wild card spot here, sitting at 8-7. I think they're sitting in the 6th slot right now. So the second to last playoff spot right now is, I think, where the Colts are right now. Yeah, the Colts did slip up in that game. Atlanta, I think, was definitely motivated. Atlanta was coming off a game where they had lost to the Carolina Panthers the week before that, man. It doesn't get more embarrassing than that. When you're fighting for your division, you lose to the Carolina Panthers, and that gives you a setback. That's ridiculous. The Falcons switched to Taylor Heineke last week. I think he's better than Desmond Ridder. He looked good against the Colts last week. They won. That was a big win for the Falcons. They really needed that win. They were in desperation mode. They wound up being a favorite of a few points there. But now, after the Colts looked so bad in that game, I think the Colts have to be the play here. They're back playing an AFC team. They're fighting for the division, man. This is a big spot for them. They're still battling with Houston. Houston's going to be getting Stroud back. They're still battling with Jacksonville, even though Jacksonville hasn't looked good recently. Trevor Lawrence looks like he's playing injured, but I don't know, man. He's going to be healing up probably and getting better as we get into these final weeks here. So the Colts really, really need this game. The Raiders, even though they're technically not eliminated from the playoffs, I think they got to kind of know that they're eliminated from the playoffs. Even though you could say they're kind of playing with house money because they kind of know they're eliminated. Yeah, but they're on a short week here. And what did they just do? They just upset the Kansas City Chiefs on Christmas in a game that everybody was watching as like a 10-point underdog. The Ravens went into, Raiders, went into Arrowhead and beat their division rival, the Kansas City Chiefs, who have been atop that division for so long. And that was a misleading result because the Raiders only scored 3 points on offense, man. If you take away that long run they had to seal the game at the end, they only had like 140 yards of offense to the Chiefs, like 300 something. The Chiefs were just making a ton of mistakes, drop passes again, just bad offensive mistakes all over the place, bad turnovers. The Raiders scored 14 points on defense in that game. Raiders did not really have any business winning that game. They put up no offense. But people are going to look at that and think, well, the Raiders just upset the Kansas City Chiefs. Of course, they're going to beat the Colts, who just looked awful last week when we saw them against the Falcons. Like, how are the Raiders not going to be able to beat the Colts if what we just saw is that the Raiders just beat the Chiefs? Come on. It doesn't work that way, man. It does not work that way. I mean, I think the Raiders, yeah, it's a fine story, but the Colts are in the playoff mix right now, and they really need this game. Even though the Raiders technically do need it and they're getting points, I think the Raiders might not have that much left. They're on a short week coming off such a huge upset. It's a letdown spot. The Colts are going to be in an embarrassed mode, and I think the line is too short, especially where it came out at -3. And the other thing that I think there's a potential that there could be a little bit of an extra motivating factor. I don't know, though, because a lot of the guys are gone. Like, the head coach isn't the same as what the Colts had 2 years ago, and their quarterback isn't the same, but they do have some of those players that were there 2 years ago, and they might remember what happened. I think in this same week, the second to last week, 2 seasons ago, the Colts needed to win one of their final 2 games, and the second to last game of the season, same week as this game, they were a home favorite against the Raiders, and I think the Colts were like a 6.5, 7-point favorite in that game. They lost the game. They got upset by a Jacoby Brissett-led Raiders in that spot there in that game. And then they went into Jacksonville as like a double-digit favorite. I think maybe as high as like a 17-point favorite against a Jacksonville team that was just miserable that year and couldn't do anything. And the Colts lost that game too and didn't make the playoffs because they lost both of those games. The players that are on that team might remember that. That might be a little bit of deja vu here. I don't know. I don't know if that's going to be a little bit of added motivation or not here, but I think you got to go with the Colts here. Maybe they'll be thinking about that. Maybe they won't. It was the same week of the season, same type of spot where it's like the Colts need to win, and if they win this game, there's a pretty good chance they're going to be in, even though 2 years ago it was literally if they won that one game, they were going to be in, if they won either of those. So it's not quite that here, but they might remember that. It was the Raiders that did that to them, although the Colts did go into Vegas last year and beat the Raiders in their house last year, so that was the last time they played them. I don't know if anybody's going to remember that game, an early season game, and not remember the game where really the Colts, like, their playoff chances like died while not pulling off that win as a home favorite. I think they're going to get it together here. I trust Gardner Minshew, as crazy as it sounds, more than I trust Aiden O'Connell, who's a rookie here. We're getting into playoff style football here, man, and I trust the team that has the more experience here over a rookie quarterback. That's going to be the Colts here. I don't know what the Josh Jacobs situation is for the Raiders here. If he's still going to be out, I don't know. He might be coming back. I'm not sure. But if he comes back, maybe it's a reverse injured player theory type of spot too. Well, they'll have to work him back a little bit and get used to him. And they might be thinking, hey, we won last week without him against the Kansas City Chiefs. So, of course, we're going to be able to beat the Indianapolis Colts, right? Especially if we get Jacobs back. So, I don't know. Everything lines up really nice for play on the Colts here. The market looks good for it as well. I like it. It's probably my favorite play of the week at -3. Even at 3.5, I think I like it as well. I like the Colts. I think it's a really good spot. That's play number 2. And then play number 3 to close it out is going to be on the New Orleans Saints +2.5. And you might be thinking, what are you doing, Toad? What are you doing with all of these plays, really? I like this spot, and I'm not actually on this yet because it looks like we might be able to get this back to 3 because it's sitting at 2.5 with juice right now. So I would wait on this and see if you can actually get the full 3 on this. Like I've been saying with some of my other plays here that are at 2.5, I would wait and see if you can get the 3 because it would be better than getting the 2.5, although I still like the Saints at the 2.5 number as well. we have here is, even though the Buccaneers have ticked up from 2 to 2.5, and it looks like I said, it's going through the 2.5 with juice. They have 55% of the tickets, but 54% of the cash on them. So I believe the Buccaneers are certainly going to be the public side here, and it looks like the cash discrepancy is going to be going against them a bit. And this is a spot where nobody is going to want to have anything to do with the New Orleans Saints, man. What did we just see out of the Saints? They just played in that primetime game last Thursday, and they looked horrible against the Rams, the LA Rams. I thought the Rams were in a better spot there, playing at home on a short week. The Rams with a bit more of that playoff experience there with Matthew Stafford there. I trusted him more. The Rams won that game, and the Saints put up a valiant effort, at least near the end, to make it closer. But that was a pretty convincing win by the Rams there. The Rams should have won by more than they did. There was some weird stuff that went on at the end of that game that even allowed the Saints to get within 8, which they did, but the Rams still covered. So I got my pick right in the pick'em pools on that one. Nobody's going to want anything to do with the Saints after that. They looked really bad in that game, but it's only one game, man. You're never as good as your best game, and you're never as bad as your worst, and that was one of the worst games that the Saints have played this year, but it was a short week for them. It was a tough spot. They were coming off a win where I was on them over the Giants, even though it wasn't a big win. It was a very convincing, dominant win, and the Saints were going into that playoff atmosphere, and this is also going to be a playoff atmosphere, but now I think the tides are going to have shifted a little bit, and the Saints now have the extra time to prepare. They're coming off a pretty ugly loss. They have extra time to prepare because they played on Thursday. The Buccaneers did not. The Saints looked really bad in that game, and the Buccaneers looked probably too good in their game this past week. So even though this is also going to be a playoff atmosphere here, this is a battle for the division, and I think both of these teams might still be in the wild card hunt as well, but it's really a battle for the division with now the Buccaneers, I believe, atop the division. I think they're actually one game ahead of the Saints and the Falcons, if I'm not mistaken right now. I'm not totally sure about that because Tampa won their last 2 games. But I think that's going to be the reason why the public is just going to be all over the Buccaneers here, man. I think maybe the tides have shifted a little bit here. Where do you really trust Baker Mayfield when it comes down to a playoff situation like this? I think maybe he made 1 or 2 playoff starts with Cleveland, but Derek Carr has made at least 1 or 2 with the Raiders as well. So which one of them do you trust more? I'm not totally sure about that. I like this, how the spot sets up for the Saints, though. I think Baker Mayfield looks too good these past 2 weeks, man. He's coming off 2 performances where he had a perfect passer rating in a game at Green Bay, at Lambeau, which I think had never been done before, maybe, or something like that. And then last week, the Buccaneers blew out the Jacksonville Jaguars, and there's something not right with the Jacksonville Jaguars, man. I think Trevor Lawrence, I think he's playing when he shouldn't be in there. I think he's playing injured. He's got a bad shoulder. I think he just does not look right. He does not look good. I think that's going to make the Buccaneers look better than they actually are. Those 2 wins look way too good for the Buccaneers. This is a spot where there could be a little bit of a reality check here, and the line coming out at 2.5 kind of tells you something too. It's almost like even though it looks like maybe it came out 3 at some spots with reduced juice, so you can kind of say that's basically a 2.5 line if it's 3 with reduced juice. It's like the books are almost begging you to take the Buccaneers at 2.5, man. Less than a field goal after what we've seen. We saw the Saints play horribly in primetime last week, and the Buccaneers look like they're just crushing teams right now. They look so good right now with Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, all those guys. The Buccaneers look almost unstoppable right now. So this line looks very suspicious. It looks like it's begging you to take the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here. Looks way too easy, and when it looks way too easy, it usually is. I think the Saints, they play an okay defense. I think their defense is going to be able to slow down what the Buccaneers are going to try to do offensively. They have extra time to prepare for this thing. The Saints, they're getting points, and I think they might be the more motivated team here as well, even though both of these teams certainly need it. The Saints are sitting at a game behind where the Buccaneers are, man. So the Saints might really go all out to try to win this game now that they're falling behind. They're getting points here. You got a team that's basically in desperation mode now with the Saints after losing last week. You're giving them points. I'm going to take those points. And this line is basically telling you the Buccaneers and the Saints are almost even. And people are going to look at that. And again, like I said, I think that it just looks way too easy to take the Buccaneers here. They're going to say, what's up with that? The Buccaneers are, of course, the better team than the Saints, right? Look at what they've done recently. The Buccaneers have to be the better team. I don't think so. I think most power ratings guys have these teams pretty close. And that's what this line is telling you, that this is a close matchup between these 2 teams here. I like the Saints. I'm doing it. Saints plus 2.5, baby. So those 3 plays one more time are the Miami Dolphins plus 3.5, Indianapolis Colts minus 3, New Orleans Saints plus 2.5. Those are the 3 official toad plays this week. And now if we look at if we go down the board quickly here, there are some other games that are just kind of crazy, man. Like, like I'll just comment on a couple of these games where I was looking at this board and I was like, why do I like so many of the favorites this week? I like a lot of the favorites, and then I look at some of the favorites that I think are in good situational spots, and the market is just against them, and I'm like, man, I just can't do it, even though I think some of these teams are in good spots. I did play the Colts as a favorite, but the other two that I just gave you are underdogs. But some of these other favorites, like I kind of lean to the Jaguars, even though they're down from 9 to 6.5 now with juice, so maybe like 7. The Jaguars, they've looked so awful the last few weeks. And even though I said I think Trevor Lawrence is playing injured, I don't think he's quite right. I can't quite get there playing the Jaguars, but they've just looked so bad that, like, there's got to be value on them. And the Panthers are coming off a game where they made a huge comeback against the Green Bay Packers and really took them to the wire, even though the Packers were beating them by, I don't know, multiple scores near the end, maybe even 3 scores. The Panthers came all the way back to tie it, I think, and wound up only losing by 3. When you're the Panthers like that and you almost pull off an upset like that against a team that's better than you come that close to it, I don't know how much left the Panthers are going to have in the tank after this, man. And the Jaguars need a win bad as they're still in that fight for the division. They've lost multiple games in a row now and looked really bad since that Trevor Lawrence injury. They looked really bad again going into Tampa and just getting the doors knocked off of them. Something's got to give. So that has me all leaning to the Jaguars there, but the market looks like it's against it, and that's just crazy. So I just can't get there with it, even though it looks like a spot where the Panthers might be in a bit of a hangover spot from playing their guts out last week against the Packers. And the Jaguars have just looked awful, and the Jaguars really need the game. But a team that's in desperation mode could also have a bit of pressure on them, man. So there is that. And laying 6.5 is a bit much. So I don't know. And maybe you could argue that's the same thing with the Rams, even though I kind of lean with the Rams here. The Rams are laying 5.5 on the road. They have 71% of the tickets and only 69% of the cash, so they're a public road favorite as well. And it looks like the cash discrepancy is against them on the Giants, but I think this is a horrible spot for the Giants, really. There's no way I'm going to be on the Giants, but I was looking to potentially play the Rams here, and the market signaling kind of against it is just what's keeping me off it here. That, and I just... laying points on the road, just something looks a little questionable about it. And the Rams are fighting to get into the playoffs here. They're in one of the playoff wildcard spots right now. So I don't know. Laying points with a team that kind of like needs to win sometimes isn't the greatest idea. But the Giants are really not in a good spot here. They're coming off, what do we all see on Christmas Day? They played pretty tough against the Philadelphia Eagles, and they were within 8. They were within 1 score late in that game. That game was kind of back and forth between the Giants almost running out of steam, but then getting back into it. They were aided by a pick 6. I think the Eagles did actually play better than the final score indicated. Statistically, I think the Eagles out-yarded the Giants by a ton, but the Giants were just staying in that game, man. And I think it's got to be a hangover spot. And after the Giants played such a max effort game on Christmas where they knew all eyes were watching, everybody was watching against their big division rival. They're the team that's basically leading the division in the Eagles, the team that has been the team to beat in the division over the recent years. Huge game for the Giants. And now I think it's going to be tough for them to get up off the mat after this. And who do they have next? They have the Philadelphia Eagles again, I believe, at home to finish the season. So this is actually a Philly sandwich that the Giants are in. The Giants are in a big cheesesteak sandwich here in the Philly sandwich. It's a rare event when you have a team having a game sandwiched in between 2 games against the Eagles. So that's what the Giants have here. So it is not a good spot for the Giants for all those reasons. They might be looking ahead to the Eagles as well. They're coming off a game where they played the Eagles pretty close, and they could be hung over here. The Rams do have extra time off, having played on Thursday, but the Rams did look maybe too good on Thursday in that game I mentioned against the Saints, and they've been sitting on that win for a while. So I don't know. Is that going to actually be maybe a little bit of a negative having that much time off? I don't know. The other factor here is that the Giants lost Tommy DeVito, I think, again in the game against the Eagles, and they put Tyrod Taylor back, and he's back. And I think that had something to do with the Giants' performance in that game, too, because I think the Eagles are just not ready for a scrambling, like, mobile quarterback to get in there, and that's the other dimension that Tyrod Taylor adds that Tommy DeVito does not. So I think the Eagles were not prepared for that. So Tyrod Taylor came in there and was kind of mixing it up and throwing the Eagles' game plans off a little bit. I think that had something to do with the Giants hanging in that game. the Rams having the extra time off here should be able to prepare something for Tyrod Taylor, knowing that that's who they're going to be facing now, and having that week to actually prepare for it, knowing that they're going to need to game plan for him, could be a little bit of an edge for the Rams there as well. So I do think the Giants are in a really bad spot there, but the market is just against it, man. I just can't do it. And then kind of the same is going for the Steelers-Seahawks game here, where the Seahawks are sitting at 3.5. It looks like it's actually ticked down to 3.5 with reduced juice. And the Seahawks have 58% of the tickets, but 52% of the cash on the other side on the Steelers. So it looks like there's maybe a little bit of reverse line movement here against where the public is on the Seahawks. And yeah, the public being on the Seahawks. It looks like the reverse line movement and the cash discrepancy on the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it's just crazy, man, because you got to look at this. You got to think that this can't be a good spot for the Steelers, even though the public is telling you what they think. And they apparently think the Seahawks are the better team, and I think they are the slightly better team. I think the Steelers have kind of been overrated for most of the season because they had that hot start to the season and they were overperforming, I think. And now when we've seen them kind of crash down to earth a little bit, I think that's more that's more like the realistic version of the Steelers that we're seeing here. The Steelers, man, they're coming off blowing out the Cincinnati Bengals. That was a huge win. That was an isolated game, I think, back on Saturday. So the Steelers do have extra time off, I think, because they played that game on Saturday. So they have an extra day off. But like I said with the Rams, is that going to actually hurt them a little bit because they have that extra time, like extra day just basking in that win? Like, we just beat the Cincinnati Bengals, man. Huge divisional win with playoff implications, blowout win. The Steelers couldn't have possibly looked better in that game. And the Seahawks were like tooth and nail against the Tennessee Titans, which does not look good. They had to just escape at the end by getting that touchdown, miracle touchdown late at the end, basically from Geno Smith, who was in his first game back. So I think the Seahawks are in a bad spot in that one, which is why I was on the Titans. They barely escaped. I think that might refocus the Seahawks a little bit. I think Steelers having to go out west, I think might be a little bit of a tough spot. It's a little bit of a later time slot as well. So the situation has me leaning to the Seahawks, just like it has me leaning to the Rams, but the market signaling is like totally against it, like it is with the Rams-Giants. The market is signaling on the Steelers here, which is just crazy to me. Excuse me, to think about that, because I think the Seahawks, I guess, are just still a team that the public likes, and the public just isn't buying what they saw out of the Steelers. Maybe they're saying, well, Cincinnati has Jake Browning, and maybe they're just coming back to earth. Now, I really don't know what the sentiment is there, because when Jake Browning was looking so good, everybody was really high on Cincinnati. They were high on Cincinnati going into last week's game, and Cincinnati really got messed up by the Steelers in that one. And that was a huge win for the Steelers there. So I don't know, man. I think it's kind of a letdown spot for the Steelers, and I think it's a refocus spot for the Seahawks. And I think the Seahawks having that one game under their belt with Geno Smith back, with him being back for a second game, I think is more of a positive for the Seahawks. So that's kind of the only way I look there. So that's just, yeah, it's crazy, man. It's crazy that the market is going against those situational spots that I see there on the board. So I just have to stay off those games because of it. And then Chargers-Broncos is just kind of a weird situation going on there, where the Broncos appear to have shut down Russell Wilson for the season, even though they're not eliminated. That just makes no sense to me. Like, why wouldn't you still try to get into the playoffs here if you're not eliminated yet? Like, you're playing a Chargers team that does not have Justin Herbert, and you already beat the Chargers on the roads. Like, why would you not play Russell Wilson here in a game that is certainly winnable for you as the Broncos? What are the Broncos doing, man? I mean, yeah, you lost pretty ugly to the Patriots last week, and you made a huge comeback to try to come back in that game, and you still wound up losing. There were some bad plays by the Broncos there that set up the Patriots on short field position. I think there was like a kickoff return fumble return for a touchdown for the Patriots there that was very key in that game. So the final score might not be totally indicative of what actually happened in that game. But really, I just don't know what the Broncos' mindset is or why they'd be doing that. I don't even know who their backup quarterback is at this point. I don't know what's going on with the Broncos there, why they'd sit Russell Wilson here when they still have a chance to make the playoffs here. It doesn't make any sense to me. And the Broncos are, because of that, down from 6 to 3.5 now. They have 64% of the tickets, but only 55% of the cash on them, because I think people are I don't know what people are going to be thinking. People still think the Broncos are the better of these two teams. They're not buying the Chargers. The Chargers had a big game last week, like an all-out type of performance at home where they almost were able to beat the Bills, where I was on the Chargers in that first game where they'd fired their coach. They went all out there to try to win that game. But then on the other hand, the Chargers do also know that the Broncos beat them in their own house and kind of like ended the Chargers season almost. That was the game where Justin Herbert got hurt for the season as well. So the Chargers are going to remember that, and that sets up kind of a road reversal revenge situation for the Chargers here. So the Chargers might be motivated coming into this game, just maybe wanting revenge on the Broncos there, and maybe they want to officially end the Broncos season and just put it away for them and spoil the Broncos season because the Broncos spoiled their season with Justin Herbert getting injured in that game and Broncos winning that game at LA. Maybe LA wants to do the same thing to the Broncos and end their season. I don't know, but that's a weird game, a really difficult handicap in that one. And then I'll talk about the night game because I do actually have a lean in this game, but it's tough, man. Packers-Vikings. Vikings have gone down from 2 to 1.5. 74% of the tickets and 80% of the cash on the Packers. So it looks like the Packers are a public road underdog, but they do have the cash discrepancy on them, and the line is moving in their direction, which kind of tells me there is play on the Packers. Some action in the betting market is on the Packers. Some of the bigger bets look like it is on the Packers, and I don't know if it's like a fake move or anything like that, but I think I agree with the situation that the Packers are in, at least, and I might agree with what the market is signaling there as well, because I think the market is kind of signaling the Packers' way. Even though we have seen these like primetime underdogs have been covering it like a pretty nice clip recently. A lot of it has been home underdogs. And can you really call this like an underdog when it's a 2 or 1.5 point line there where it's really just pick the winner? Probably not. It's really just who's going to show up, who's going to win this game. I think the Vikings are in a bad spot, man. They went all out last week and came really close to being able to beat the Detroit Lions. Vikings are in total desperation mode. I think they're not technically eliminated yet, and I think maybe the Packers aren't either. So this is like a battle to get into the playoffs here. So this is kind of a playoff type of game here with two inexperienced quarterbacks in big games coming in here, and Jordan Love and Nick Mullins. I wouldn't trust either of those guys, but I think I trust Nick Mullins less with the way he's been throwing so many interceptions all over the place. He's way too loose with the football. Jordan Love, I think, has been better recently at protecting the football, so I trust him a little bit more to turn the ball over less in this one. And like I said, the Vikings, they might be in a hangover spot after such a huge game against Detroit where they were almost able to beat Detroit. And coming out of that game, the Vikings are totally beat up. They lost Hawkinson to a torn ACL, and of course that's going to be factored into the line, but I think it might not be factored in enough, whereas like quarterbacks maybe get factored in too much. Tight ends that are like that good, like your security blanket, one of the best tight ends in the league, might not be getting factored into the line enough maybe. So Hawkinson is out, and it looks like Addison might be out as well for the Vikings because he got hurt in the last game as well. Excuse me. It's going to be factored into the line, but I don't know if it's factored in enough. And the Vikings, I think, are in that hangover spot. It's going to be tough to get back up off the mat, even though both teams need to win this game. The Packers, I think they're going to be a bit more focused because they almost lost to the Carolina Panthers, man. That's like inexcusable. They blew that lead against the Panthers. They had the game in hand, and then they almost lost it to the Carolina Panthers right at the end. They had to escape and win. I think it might have even been an overtime win by 3. When teams are off an escape like that in a game where they should win, where they're the favorite, like the Packers, I think that tends to refocus you a bit. So I do lean to the Packers here for all those reasons. And we really don't know what we're going to get out of the Vikings here. And this line is telling you, including factoring in the Vikings' injuries here, the Packers are actually the better team. And people might disagree with that. With the recent play they've seen out of the Packers, there's not much to like from the Packers recently, even though it looks like the public is on the Packers. Maybe that's a reaction to the Vikings having injuries and stuff. But the Vikings looked not bad when they had Josh Dobbs in there. They haven't been playing that bad in any of these games, really. They almost beat Cincinnati. By the scoreboard, they almost beat Detroit, even though Detroit did outplay them statistically by quite a bit. I don't know, man. So, like, I would have thought the public would be a bit more on the Vikings here because we've seen the Vikings playing better than the Packers. The Packers have just looked ugly. They allowed that huge performance from Baker Mayfield 2 weeks ago. They lost a couple games in a row, and then they blew the lead and almost lost to the Panthers as well. So I don't see how the public is really on the Packers here, but maybe it's just because of the injury situation. Maybe it's the name, the Green Bay Packers. I really don't know, but just based on the situation and what we saw last week, I do kind of just have to lean to the Packers there. And that's those are my feelings on the slate, and that's going to do it, man. One more time, my plays this week officially are Miami Dolphins plus 3.5, Indianapolis Colts -3, and New Orleans Saints plus 2.5. I think those are all good situations, and I think we have market agreement on those games as well. I like it. I like those three. I'm Toad. Let's do it, man. Let's get some wins in NFL Week 17. Hopefully this has been good and informative for you. You can follow me, Tower Gang Toad, on Twitter. I do political shit posting. I talk about sports. That's pretty much what I do over there. I'm just an idiot on Twitter pretty much. And then I do the Tower Gang podcast, which is the most offensive podcast on the planet. We had another really insane episode last night. Hilarious episode. You can go check that out where we talked about blood pillows. You can go check that out if you want to know what we mean by that. And go follow the guys at flapper.net as well, FLAPPR.net. They are blog artists. They do a blog, and they are purveyors of hot women as well, and merch related to hot women. They do political shit posting. They talk about sports. They have a blog. They have a Twitter. They put out videos as well, and they like all that stuff. They like the sports, the women, the jokes, and the politics. So that's the sphere that both of us are in. So that's going to do it for me, man. I'm Tower Gang Toad, NFL Week 17. Let's do it. Let's get it done. Peace out.